this evening a few, as always, fascinating selections from the writings of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, the very great and in some ways controversial um 18th century Torah personality. Anyway, we've described him in the past. I'm not going to review that now, but I do want to have another different, very short introduction, and that is that tonight's shiur is dedicated to the refuah shleima and to the merit of three members of the Kesher circle, Yitzchak ben Batya, that is the father of Robin Cohen, who is in well, Robin is visiting her parents in Cape Town, and so wish him refuah shleima. Also, Malka Tirza Bat Chana, and another member of the Kesher circle, Yael Bat Esther. And we wish all of them a refuah shleima, speedy and complete recovery. And this shiur tonight is dedicated to their merit. Okay, I hope you have a chumash with you because it's always good to have the text in front of you. So we're going to look at Parshas Vaera, and take a look, please, with me at Perek Vav Pasuk Dalid. So it's chapter 6, verse 4. Hashem appears to Moshe. Hashem appears to Moshe, and he says that I appeared, or Hashem says to Moshe, I appeared to the patriarchs Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with a certain name. My name of the Tetragrammaton I did not make known to them. And then in Pasuk Dalet, V'gam hakimosias brisi itam, and I shall uphold my covenant with them. In other words, I've made a covenant to them repeatedly, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. To each of them, I expressed promises, in particular the promise of inheriting the land of Israel, but I did not fulfill it yet. I told them about it. I assured them it will come to pass, but they did not witness the fulfillment of that promise. But you shall, and this is what Hashem says to Moshe. So let's take a look at the particular turn of phrase. Hakimos says, "Vi si itam lases lahem es eretz Canaan es eretz megureihem asher garuva," the land of their sojourn in which they sojourned. Eretz megureihem. The Torah is emphasizing the fact that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov lived in the land of Israel, but the word that I would use in English, which I just did use, is sojourn. Even though sojourn is a somewhat archaic word, I don't think we use it much in everyday conversation. If you did, you would sound like a Victorian, maybe, or Elizabethan even, but actually it's a useful word. Sojourn means to dwell or to live in a transient way, as a newcomer, as a new arrival, someone who is temporarily occupying or settling in a certain place, doesn't necessarily have permanent rights of residency. He may not expect to live there permanently, even if he lives out his life there, but he's only a sojourner. This is the meaning of the word in English. Not that I'm here to teach you English, but that the word megurehem implies all of that. In modern Hebrew, lagur just means to live, efotagar. But in classical Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, it has the connotation related to the word ger. A ger is a new arrival. He's not a native-born son of that country or that nation. He is a new arrival. He is a ger. Like I've said many times, the Simons have that status. In Britain, we have indefinite right to remain, but we're not British citizens. Maybe we should rectify that in accordance with the advice of some of my good friends. But in any case, so far, that's our circumstance. But the reason I belabor the point is that the Torah here is distinguishing between the experience of the patriarchs in the land of Israel and the experience that Hashem is now promising to the generation of Moshe, namely they're going to leave Mitzrayim and they're going to realize the fulfillment of that promise. Okay, that is the context of the comments that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz makes. So Rashi already says that Kama Haftachos, I made lots of promises, but I didn't fulfill it to them. I'm going to fulfill that promise for you. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, this idea of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Megureihem, he says it's not just a turn of phrase sort of by happenstance, but we know that Avraham was told that he and his his descendants will be foreigners in a foreign land for 400 years. This is the interval that the Torah mentions. In actuality, the Jews were in Egypt only for 210 years, and much has been said about that. Much, again, effort has been invested into explaining the distinction. The most well-known tradition, which I think we would have to draw upon, is the idea that the 400 years begins from the birth of Yitzchak, because from the time that Yitzchak was born, Abraham's progeny were in exile, even though Yitzchak himself never even left the land of Israel. But here we go, Megurehem. He was a sojourner in the land of Israel. He hadn't really settled down, even though Yaakov was also in the land of Israel, also a third generation, but he was still only a sojourner. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, why do we say they were sojourners? They were living very well. They were affluent. They were well regarded. They bought land when they needed to do so. Abraham bought land, Marasa Machpelah, Yaakov bought land as well. So actually, where do we see the designation of sojourning? Why do we have the notion that they were already in exile? Of course, in Egypt, they were in exile because they were oppressed, persecuted, enslaved. But what about Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov? Why does the Torah say Eretz Megurehem? Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, the reason is that the patriarchs, even though they lived in the land of Canaan and they were maybe quite comfortable there in terms of affluence and maybe acceptance, but they still lived with anxiety, because Abraham came to teach about monotheism and the people surrounding him were all idolaters. They didn't necessarily take kindly to his message, to his proselytizing, shall we say, even though they valued probably the blessing that he brought to the land. And we know that he was uh, hospitable, that he excelled in the quality of hospitality, and probably those who enjoyed his hospitality also naturally were drawn to his teachings. Well and good, but it's natural to expect that there were many antagonists as well. Yitzchak certainly had that as well with Avimelech, where he was pushed from place to place, digging the wells and all of that. And Yaakov, of course, was on the run. Yaakov was on the run from Esav, and he lived presumably the rest of his life also with the fear, at least while he was in Canaan, the Esav was not that far away, the fear of Esav. Says Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz, even Yitzchak, he had Yishmael, his half brother, with whom he never really got along all that well. So they had that anxiety. But he goes further with a very, I think, keen observation. He quotes the Zohar that the expression Eretz Mugurehem Asher Garuva is related to the word Lo Saguru Mipnei Ish, meaning do not be afraid of another person. Lagur also means to be afraid. So Eretz Mugurehem, the land of their insecurity, because they were still only as we keep saying, sojourners, they were newcomers. Even Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, okay, 3 generations, but their roots were still in Mesopotamia. And even though they bought a certain piece of land, but they were never fully integrated. And certainly the promise of becoming the masters of the land of Canaan was never fulfilled for them. On the contrary, there was that anxiety. And this is the promise that Hashem says to Moshe, I am going to fulfill for you and your generation the much greater promise of settling the land of Israel and no longer being there as Gerim, as sojourners, but rather as those who are a sovereign in a nation in their own land. I sometimes think about, the modern day state of Israel, which has achieved remarkable things by any estimation in the 75 or 80 years of its existence. And I think that we can, certainly we are all very conscious of the achievements of the state of Israel. I don't mean only economically, but in so many other ways as well. And compared to the days of years and years ago, for those who visited Israel in the early days, it's a different experience. Now, Israel is in many ways a developed economy, a world leader in so many respects. And yet, there is still that tension, that anxiety, that insecurity. They're still surrounded by enemies. They're still, um, conscious of the fact that their foothold in their own land is tenuous, even to this day. And so, in a way, I feel there's a sort of contemporary echo of this observation, Eretz Megurei Garuba, that the redemption, if the messianic process is indeed underway, which we hope it is, but it certainly is only partial. It's only a, 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 a kind of work in progress towards the redemption of which the Torah speaks, including in this passage where Hashem addresses Moshe to say the redemption is finally at hand. Of course, the redemption from Mitzrayim is the paradigm for future Geula as well. For those who were paying close attention or even any attention to the promo that we did earlier today, I think Ruthie sent it out. We have identified the topic of the shir as, if I can remember it myself, the Kal Vachomer. Moshe says the Jewish people won't listen to me. How will haven't listened to me? Why should Pharaoh listen to me? And that's the subject that I'd like to turn to now. If we take a look just a few verses further at verse 12. So actually, we need to go back to verse 9. Vadaber Moshe el bnei Yisrael. So, well, go forward to verse 9. Vadaber Moshe Cain el bnei Israel. Moshe spoke accordingly to the children of Israel. V'lo shamu el Moshe mikotze ruach ome avodah kasha. But they didn't listen to Moshe. The Jewish people did not sort of hearken to him. They didn't accept his words because uh, of their distress, because of the shortness of spirit, ume avodah kasha, and the hard labor. Then Hashem says to Moshe in the next pasuk, Yud and Yud Aleph, Bo daber el Paro melech Mitzrayim yishlach es ben Yisrael me'artzo. Go speak to Paro now. You've spoken to the children of Israel. Now go speak to Paro. Tell him he should send the Jews out. Bnei Israel. There's time to go. Moshe naturally says, "V'deber Moshe lifnei Hashem leimar." Moshe says before God, "Hein bnei Yisrael lo shamu elai." The children of Israel didn't listen to me. Ve'ech yishmeini Paro. So how will Paro listen to me? V'ani aral sfasayim, and I am of uncircumcised lips, which probably means that I'm not fluent in speech. My command of whether the language or my fluency, maybe I have a speech defect according to the famous medrash, which we once discussed that as well. So the Moshe mentions this. He says to Hashem, the Bnei Yisrael didn't listen to me, so how will Paro listen to me? Says Rashi, a famous comment of Rashi. This is one of 10. Ze echad me'asara kal v'chomer shebetorah. This is one of 10 examples of a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer, for all Talmudists, is a familiar formula. It is a method of logic, an argument a fortiori, from minor to major. It is a logical argument based on the idea that if a certain circumstance applies in a particular or certain law or a certain outcome applies in a certain circumstance, then it will certainly apply in a more difficult circumstance or in a more weighty circumstance. So in the case that we're considering, this is a kal v'chomer. Moshe says to God, Bnei Israel didn't listen to me, so how will Paro listen to me? And the simple understanding is Bnei Israel, for whom the message is one that is naturally appealing, because my message is it's time to go. No more servitude, no more suffering, no more bondage. We're going to be redeemed, and we're going to the land flowing with milk and honey. Bnei Israel naturally would like to hear such a message. Paro naturally would not like to hear such a message. Is exactly what he doesn't want to hear. So Moshe says, if Bnei Israel didn't listen to me, and my message for them is a harbinger of great things, a harbinger of good news, certainly Paro is not going to listen to me when I'm coming to him with bad news. That's the Kal V'chomer. All the Mefarshim ask, or many Mefarshim ask, this Kal V'chomer can be challenged because the Torah says in verse 9, we just looked at it, the Torah says why Bnei Israel didn't listen to Moshe. It's true, we might naturally imagine that they would like to hear what he has to say because he's got good news for them, but they couldn't bring themselves to hear it because they were suffering so much shortness of breath, hard labor. Their spirits were so crushed, they didn't have the imagination, they didn't have the capacity to dream and to even imagine that Moshe's message is true. Where that certainly doesn't apply to Paro. Paro is not suffering from shortness of breath nor from avodah kasha. Now, I'd like to devote the rest of our time this evening, short time this evening, to a number of approaches to this question. So the first one I would mention is actually based on the passage that follows. So we'll keep in mind what the question we've asked, but now let's add a further question. If you look just a few verses further on to verse 14, now the Torah seems to pivot here and take up a subject which is a bit technical, a bit almost anticlimactic, having been following breathlessly the drama of Moshe and Aaron approaching Paro. They demonstrate their credentials as emissaries of the God of Israel before Pharaoh. He rejects them anyway. He intensifies the labor and the servitude at the end of last week's Parasha. And then Moshe says to God, what's going on? You sent me to redeem them. You've only made it worse. And then Hashem says to Moshe, hang tight, don't worry, redemption is on its way. And he goes to the Jewish people and tells them, yeah, redemption, and the people won't listen to him. And he says to God, if they won't listen to me, Pharaoh soon they won't listen to me. After all that, and of course, that's exactly what happens because Moshe does uh, uh, approach Paro, and or actually we'll see that later on. But in any case, the drama is interrupted, is paused for a technical list of genealogy, starting with verse 14. From the sons of Reuven, from the tribe of Reuven, these are the sub-tribes, the heads of the sub-tribes. In other words, the sons of Reuven each became the patriarch of a sub-tribe. So we have Reuven was Bechor Yisrael, he was the firstborn of Israel. Chanoch, Palu, Chatzon, Charmi. Then we have Shimon, Yemuel, Yamin, etc. Then we have Bnei Levi, and Levi, we go a bit further. We mentioned the sons of Levi. We also mentioned the grandsons, the great-grandsons, a few generations. In particular, of course, Moshe and Aaron are mentioned here. Yocheved and Amram are mentioned here, the parents of Moshe. And then we go beyond that, and we mention Korach and other personalities. We mention until Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron. Okay, this is very, you know, maybe a few familiar names to us, and no doubt there's some importance to it. Doesn't, as I said, match the drama and the fast-paced action that we have been following in the first chapters and continue beyond that. What's it all about? Why bother with it? So that is a question which has always puzzled me. Rashi has something to say, not that convincing prima facie. So let me tell you what Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says about it. I think fascinating. He says, uh, yeah, what is the purpose of this, and why does the Torah mention Reuven, Shimon, just the sons of Reuven, sons of Shimon? In the case of Levi, we go a few generations forward. Again, at the simple level, because you want to mention Moshe and Aharon, they're the main players, so therefore the Torah provides their yichus, their pedigree. What more to it might there be? Rabbi Eibeschutz asks an interesting question, which is not explicit in the Torah, it's hinted to in the Torah, but it's mentioned in the rabbinic tradition, and that is that the tribe of Levi were never enslaved. Yaakov had 12 sons, as we know, and all of them, including Yosef, who was the viceroy, but with the passing of the generations and the new king arose in Egypt, their privileged status was quickly revoked, and they were all enslaved eventually, except for the tribe of Levi. According to rabbinic tradition, the tribe of Levi was never enslaved. They were not free to come and go and to leave. They couldn't emigrate, but they were not enslaved. And a number of explanations have been advanced for that. The simple explanation is because they were like the priestly caste, and Yosef himself had established a rule in Egypt that's mentioned in the book of Bereshit towards the end. Explicitly, Yosef had established a protocol in which the priestly caste, they did not have to work, and they were not sort of subject to the authority of Pharaoh. They had their own role within the society, and therefore the tribe of Levi, which in the Jewish nation fulfilled that role, also was not enslaved. That's the simple understanding. That's what Rashi mentions. But Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz has a different theory, an interesting theory. He says that the um, Paro had the expectation that the tribe of Levi, I want to say expectation, according to what he says, he speculates that Paro was aware through his necromancers or through his occult experts that the Redeemer of Israel would come from the tribe of Levi. And we have hints to this as well that earlier in the Torah from the tribe of Levi. So Paro wanted to stymie that hope. He wanted he came came up with a strategy that would make that either impossible or implausible. What was that? The tribe of Levi was not enslaved. If you're not enslaved, then you don't have the same motivation to throw off the shackles of bondage and to rise up in rebellion against your overlord. If you're not enslaved in the first place, if you're living quite comfortably, or at least, upper middle class, let's say, and you don't suffer, then why rock the boat? Of course, the one who leads the rebellion is going to come from the oppressed masses, from those who are subjugated, from those who are enslaved, for those who, so to speak, have nothing to lose. But if you're living quite comfortably, then you're not going to get involved in that kind of project. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz puts it sort of homiletically. He says, Notzer te'ena yochal pirya. The one who plants the tree will eat of its fruit. Misha saval bagalos yeh achar kach l'rosh. The one who suffers in the exile, he's going to be the one who's motivated to take the lead. So and to overthrow the overlords. So therefore, Paro's strategy was, since Levi is supposed to produce the leader, the want to lead this rebellion, so I won't subjugate Levi, and therefore they won't be motivated this way. Now, he doesn't quote Ramban, but to me this is an echo, a little echo of Ramban. Ramban asks a different question. Ramban asks, when we see much later on in the Torah, the numbers of each tribe. So everyone knows, the Torah mentions it explicitly, that there were approximately 600,000 men who left Egypt, and a similar number of women, presumably a large number of children as well. And each tribe, therefore, was approximately 50,000, because that's 600,000 divided by 12. And indeed, the Torah mentions the size of each tribe. By far, the smallest tribe was the tribe of Levi. So Ramban asks, why is that? Levi is the priestly caste. Levi are the righteous ones. We would expect that the blessing that Hashem gave to the Jewish people of multiplying and increase would be especially applicable for the tribe of Levi. And we see exactly the opposite. The tribe of Levi is much less than half of the median number of 50,000, about 22,000. So, and this is very surprising. So Ramban says, I'll just sum it up with a little cliche: when the going gets tough, the tough get going, which means that because of the persecution, because of the suffering, because of the bondage, that is why the blessing of Hashem was manifest in the children of Israel, and they were so productive in terms of increase in numbers. Levi had it easy, so since Levi had it easy, they didn't work as hard. Like Avis used to say, we're number two, we try harder. Well, Levi didn't have to try harder. Things were okay for Levi. In a way, this is an echo of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says as well, that Paro did not subjugate the Levium in order to make it more difficult and less likely that a redeemer would come from the tribe of Levi. And he says this exactly is why the Jewish people didn't listen to Moshe, because they said, hey, you're going to be the Redeemer. Where have you been? You, Moshe, have anyway been away for so many years. We haven't seen you in the longest time. You've been in Midian. But even your whole tribe, your whole family, your whole extended family, they're not subjugated. So we don't believe that you are even going to feel our pain. And what's your motivation to even be the one to save us? He suggests this is another reason why maybe Bnei Israel didn't hear. That's why it says because they were working very hard. They were slaving away. They said to Moshe, you're not one of us. You're not even part of this experience. You're not part of this bitter exile. So therefore, they won't listen to him. That's why they did not listen to him. And this is the Kal V'chomer. And he says, Bnei Israel lo shamu elai, and for this reason itself, that's why they would not listen to me. Just look at my notes here for a moment. The response is that the explanation, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, is the following: the tribe of Levi, the Egyptians mocked the Jews, who were claiming moral steadfastness. They were claiming moral probity, by which I mean they were not promiscuous. The men and the women were married to one another. They maintained their marital relationships. They were not did not engage in adulterous behavior, which normally a slave population is notorious for that sort of debauchery. And the Jewish people claim that we did not, and that's part of why the Torah much later on mentions the yichus, the genealogy, and all of that. But the Egyptians were mocking them and said, "What do you mean? If we are ruling over your bodies, if we are exploiting the men for labor, don't you think we're exploiting the women as well? You think that if just as we were able to dominate the men and force them to do what we want, all of our hard labor for us. So all the more so we're going to take advantage of the women when the Spirit moves us. So don't imagine that your even genealogy is so reliable, because who knows who the fathers of these children really are." And they said that, yes, it's true, Yaakov was a great man, a holy man, his children very chaste. The generation that came down from Canaan to Mitzrayim, yeah, the fathers are the fathers, the children are the children, meaning the children of the fathers. But after that, it's a free for all. After that, you can't tell who is who and who comes from whom. The exception was the tribe of Levi. That's what the Torah says over here. The tribe of Levi is the tribe that maintained, and I'm only saying this was the allegation of the Egyptians. In actuality, according to our tradition, this was part of the merit of the Jewish people, that they were chaste in this regard. But in any case, the Torah is testifying regarding the family of Moshe and Aaron, for example. That's why the parents of Moshe are not mentioned in last week's Parsha when Moshe is born. They're only mentioned now. Yocheved, his mother, Amram, his father, are mentioned here in order to highlight the validity of this attribution, to say that this is the mother, this is the father, these are the children, and there is no corruption and no as I say, promiscuity at play here. Then he adds something quite interesting, which others have mentioned as well. Actually, the Torah says, if you take a look, it's explicit here. In verse 20, Vaikach Amram es Yocheved dodaso lo liisha. Amram married his aunt Yocheved. Now, the interesting thing is that the Torah actually forbids such a union. Later on in the Torah in Vayikra, where we have a list of relationships which are restricted because of consanguinity, because of the close blood relatives, or even by marriage in some cases as well, for a man to marry his aunt is one of them. By the way, a man can marry his niece. That the Torah allows. A man can marry his brother's daughter, for example, but a man is not allowed to marry his uncle's wife or his father's sister. He may not marry his aunt, and that's what Amram did. Of course, the Torah had not yet been given, and Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says that this fulfills that principle that we do not appoint a leader upon the community unless, in the pithy imagery of the sages, unless he has a kupa shel shratzim talui al tzavaro, unless he has a pouch of like rodents, which is hanging around his neck. We would say in our idiom, a skeleton in his closet. So this was the skeleton in Moshe's closet, the fact that he was the product of a union that the Torah would later forbid. But the Torah had not yet been given at that time. The tradition that the patriarchs kept the Torah, that's Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Subsequent generations did not. And Moshe's own parents, although they were righteous people, but the Torah had not yet been given, and Moshe himself was a product of such a union. So here we have the idea that the Torah testifies who is the father, who is the mother, and yet at the same time, we also have the detail in which actually Moshe's own parentage is the result of a union which the Torah would later forbid. This is the kupa shel shratzim talui al tzavaro. Okay, I know our time is nearly up. I want to mention, if we have time, hopefully briefly, two further interpretations of this question. Again, the question is the Kal Vachomer. So we've seen one answer to the Kal Vachomer. The reason the Jewish people didn't listen to Moshe is because they were enslaved and Moshe was not enslaved. Therefore, they wouldn't listen to him. So Moshe said, "Well, then, if they won't listen to me for that reason, Paro certainly won't listen to me for that reason." Actually, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz has a much more elaborate analysis of this, but that's enough for our purposes right now. Vayitzavim al bnei Israel. Turn back now to pasuk Yud Gimel. A beautiful comment, and then we'll end with a final thought as well. Vadeber Hashem el Moshe vel Aharon vayitzavim el bnei Israel vel Paro melech Mitzrayim. Vayitzavim. Moshe spoke to Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, and he commanded them el bnei Israel regarding bnei Israel and Paro the king of Egypt to release them. Says our friend for the year of Yonatan Eibeschutz, he says Vayitzaveim, of course, comes from the word tzivui or the word mitzvah, but it's related to another word. He says it's related to the word tzavta, tzadi, vav, taf, aleph. It's really an Aramaic word, but it's found in Hebrew as well. It's related to the modern word tsevet. Tsevet is like a faculty or a staff or a crew. If you fly in the airplane, if you remember such a thing. So they have the tsevet, the cabin crew called the tsevet, or the staff. The word savta means together, those who work together. He says that Moshe and Aaron were a double act. It was firstly a partnership based on mutual respect and recognition of the complementary talents of each of the two of them. We mentioned in the past that Aaron was not jealous of his younger brother Moshe, who ultimately was elevated to the position of the top rank, the top leadership, and Aaron was in a way his sort of sidekick, but it was a double act. But he says more than that. Moshe would speak to Bnei Israel, and he would not speak to Paro. And this is a novelty, because we always think of Moshe marching into Paro and instructing him, demanding, threatening, and maybe allowing himself to be persuaded again and again when Paro changes his mind and changes it back once more. Moshe is the main man. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, no, it's not so. The Torah always says that Moshe and Aharon went to speak to Paro. Now, the simple understanding is, as we know, Moshe, like we keep saying, had a speech impediment. Therefore, Aaron was his spokesman. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says, no, there's more to it. Aharon was the main one who spoke to Paro. Why? Because it wouldn't be right for Moshe to lay down the law to Paro, to march in to him and to tell him what he has to do. Because don't forget, even though it may have been a different Pharaoh, but Moshe was raised by Pharaoh. Moshe was saved by Pharaoh. Moshe grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. So it's not right for Moshe to be speaking to Pharaoh and bossing him around. Aaron did that. Also, Moshe's speech impediment meant that if he had spoken to Paro with the speech impediment and Paro had listened and the Jewish people didn't listen, they would make the Jewish people look very bad. So therefore, he says that Moshe spoke to Bnei Israel. So take a look again at verse 13. Vayidera Hashem el Moshe v'Aaron vaytzveim el Bnei Israel. That they would speak to Bnei Israel. That is Moshe. Moshe spoke to Bnei Israel. Ve'el Paro, it was Aaron who spoke to Paro. That was the Vayitzavim from the word Tzavta. I'd just like to mention that I heard many years ago from Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zichrono Livracha, that the word mitzvah is related to the word Tzavta, because a mitzvah is not just a matter of fulfilling a divine commandment, and it's not just a matter of doing what's right or doing a good deed. A mitzvah is also establishing a relationship with the master of the universe. So yes, a mitzvah is a commandment, but it's related to the word savta, which means to join together, to enter into a relationship with Hashem. So this is just derech agav, by the by, about the word Vayitzaveim and the word mitzvah and the word savta, that Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, you are a pair, you're a team. And with this we can understand a very difficult Rashi, because Rashi says that Moshe and Aaron, actually we'll leave that difficult Rashi for another time. Okay, I just want to finish up now with a last thought. I think a very novel thought, a very beautiful thought as well. uh, again, on this difficult Kal Vachomer. The weakness in the Kal Vachomer is that Bnei Yisrael didn't listen to Moshe for a particular reason, namely because of the servitude, the subjugation. They had the poverty of the spirit, whereas Paro wasn't suffering from that. So this is the challenge to the Kal Vachomer of Moshe, which, according to Rashi, was formulated as one of the 10 Kal Vachomers in the Torah. Says, excuse me. Okay, I'm really nearly done. Moshe, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz has a novel suggestion. He says that when Moshe said to Paro, when Moshe said to Hashem, hey, in Pasuk Yud Beis, verse 12, Hey in b'nei Yisrael lo shumai elai ve'echi yishma'eni Paro, v'anir al tzfasayim. Bnei Yisrael didn't listen to me. How will Paro listen to me? He says there's another way to understand it. Moshe's thinking was similar to the thinking of Yonah ben Amittai. Yonah Amittai was one of the most well-known prophets. He's the one who is the star of the book of Jonah. He was the one in the whale. Yonah was summoned by God to deliver a message to Nineveh, to tell the people of Nineveh, the idolatrous peoples of Nineveh, they better get their act together, otherwise they're going to be severely punished. And Yonah tried to flee. And the Mefarshim say the main reason, there I'm sure other reasons, but the simple understanding of why he tried to flee was Yonah was a prophet for the Jewish people. And the Jewish people were not listening to his prophecies. And Yonah thought, if I go to Nineveh and I tell them that I come in the name of God and they have to get their house in order, and they do so, how will that reflect on the Jewish people? Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking the same way. It doesn't mean he doesn't. There's another way to understand it. Not that Moshe says, if the Jewish people didn't listen to me, how will Paro listen to me? It was the Jewish people didn't listen to me. What if Paro listens to me? What if Paro responds to my message and the Jewish people laughed me off? How will that reflect? What a kitrug, what a criticism, what a condemnation that will be of the Jewish people. So that is the meaning, according to this, that Moshe was saying that my concern for the Jewish people is such that if I go and speak to Paro, what if Paro does listen to me? Then it's going to be such a bad reflection on the Jewish people. Who knows, Hashem might even reconsider the whole idea and not redeem them after all. What's the answer? What's Hashem's response? Don't worry, Paro's not going to listen to you. Don't be concerned about that possibility. The whole exercise, my friends, is an object lesson. The lesson is for us. It's for future generations. We who read in the Torah, the insight into human nature, the understanding of the way Hashem runs the world. This is the reason for the whole exercise. Of course, Hashem could have led the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim without any plagues at all. But the purpose is to give us an insight into human nature and human understanding. It's not for Paro. As we know, Paro soon became like a puppet on the string. Paro was not even a master of his own destiny after a while. Hashem hardened Paro's heart. This is the response that Hashem says. And I'd just like to end this thought with my own thought, a thought of my own as well, that we have been living for the last 10 months under the dark shadow of this public health crisis in which 2 million people have lost their lives around the world, 2 million and counting, lo aleinu. And our community has not been spared, including in many cases people that we know who have succumbed to this terrible disease. And it has completely brought our society and countries around the world to their knees. And yet we are seeking out, and this year is an example of it, new ways, innovative ways to keep in touch with one another, to study Torah. In some ways, we've discovered new horizons, new capacities, new techniques, maybe developing new technology in order to remain connected and in order to achieve what we want to achieve. And yet we have paid a price for it as well. And we often wonder, certainly I often wonder, what will be at the end of this crisis? What will be when the vaccine is widely circulated and Hashem, we can look back at this crisis? What will we have learned? How will we have changed? How will we have improved? What benefit will accrue to us because of it? And this is what Paro I think this is what Hashem says to Moshe. You're wondering what if Paro listens? How will that reflect on Jewish people? Don't worry, he's not going to listen. It's going to be a lesson for all future generations that we can learn from. And I say to myself as well, certainly, what will I learn from this COVID crisis as well? How will I change for the better? How will we be transformed? What lessons will we derive from this experience looking back? Thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry we've gone over by a few minutes, but I hope you'll agree we've looked at some interesting passages and always the novel and fresh, creative, imaginative interpretations of Yonatan and Eibeschutz. So thank you to everyone for listening. I wish you a wonderful Shabbos. If there are any questions or comments, we're happy to
Yes.
take. Yeah,
Is
Bakasha.
the link for next Monday the same as for last Monday?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Yes,
Monday
thank
we're
you.
hosted by Dr. Schmidt, and tonight we're hosted by Paul Berger, and I'm grateful for them because my technological skills are very modest. I can just about sit down in front of a computer. But anyway, yeah, so the same thing. Any questions or thoughts about this Parsha blockbuster? You know why Cecil B. DeMille made the film The Ten Commandments? Because he thought, why waste 3,000 years of free publicity? So these chapters are never fail to inspire and to offer new insights. You know, as long as we draw on the teachings of the sages, we can always find new and relevant aspects. Week by week and year by year, I should say.